So today I'm going to talk about cyber defense in the age of the Executive Order 13800. Can I see a show of hands of everybody that studied the Executive Order? Wow, it's not that many people, surprisingly enough. So the Executive Order is made up of 20 to 30 different mandated components. It ranges from infrastructure to IT protection, to technology safeguards, as well as accountability, even to the agency head level, as well as compliance with some frameworks from both NIST and with FISMA. If you take a look at the world today, the threats have never been greater and the impact has never been greater. Examples would be OPM. We're all aware of that. 21 million people that have security clearances, their complete profiles have been exposed. If you take it another step, there are many people, probably some of you in this room, that believe the balance of the U.S. electoral process is now in jeopardy because of hacking. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but that's certainly a threat. We've seen simple devices, IoT devices, such as web cameras that each of you might have at home or connected devices that you might have at home, become weaponized and be able to contribute to volumetric attacks in DDoS that we've never seen in the past. It wouldn't be unusual 2 or 3 years ago to have a 100 gigabyte attack make the front page. But what we're seeing today is attacks that are 500 gigabytes, 750 gigabytes. And the most recent attack was over a terabyte. There's not an enterprise, there's not a government agency in the world that would sit there and try to prepare for those type of volumes. So the fact of the matter is the landscape is changing. And we need to be able to address that. As an example, a couple of the presenters were talking about big data analytics. Well, I like to think, and not a commercial, but Akamai is a cybersecurity company that we perform in the cloud. We use big data every day. On any given day, we're handling over 20 terabytes of attack traffic. We see 80 million web application firewall rules trigger off in an hour. And on top of that, we're analyzing over 600,000 log lines a second in order to make big decisions around not only delivery, but also around security. So as we take a look at what's happening today, we talked about OPM, we talked about IoT devices. The world is changing very quickly, and that's the reason the executive order is in place. If you take a look at some of the things or some of the main components within the executive order, federal network protection is one of the key elements within the executive order. And no longer can we take a look at a federal network being a couple of data centers, the network pipes to get to those data centers or to remote offices. But the federal network has expanded radically in order to serve the citizen better, in order for an agency to meet its mission goals, and in order to be able to provide new level of services. So all that has evolved. And the fact of the matter is that the government needs to consider, and is considering, mobile computing. So everybody's coming in on their iPad or iPhone, and they're either going to access their public cloud or the origin infrastructure between or behind the firewall. There's also cloud, and we've all heard cloud, and cloud, it certainly has enough momentum where the government is using application and data assessment to figure out what goes to the cloud and what doesn't. We also have IoT, which I talked about, which is probably the fastest growing technology trend that we'll see at least, for the last 20 years. It's growing at a rate where it's kind of hard to put against other technologies, put BYOD, put mainframe the servers to the side. It's dwarfing those from a growth rate. And then we also need to evolve the federal network to include things such as Shadow IT. When you can take a credit card and swipe and open up a cloud instance, or swipe to be able to actually hire an attack. All those, from IoT to shadow IT to mobile to cloud to the traditional data centers, must be taken into consideration in order to better protect the federal networks. So the executive order has a couple of key components in there: access management, as well as authentication services, real emphasis on application assessment, trying to determine what applications are in your data center or remotely housed that actually have sensitive data in there, PII type data. And how do you put a framework around that to protect those assets first, and then move down the stack in terms of risk mitigation. So, as I mentioned, in order for the evolving federal network to be able to protect, detect, and actually recover from the certainty of attacks, those are the provisions that are made up in the executive order for the federal network. The next area that I wanted to bring up was resiliency and distributed attacks. A big section on that. So for resiliency, the federal IT technology and infrastructure truly needs to be able to scale on the fly. So we already talked about some attacks. You know, a 100 gig attack is enough to take down the average data center, maybe even a cloud provider. But we're seeing attacks that are 10 times that. So you need to be able to scale immediately in order to absorb those attacks, defend, deflect, or deny, and push the traffic someplace else. So that's critical. If we move on to distributed attacks need to be handled through distributed architectures. There is no good reason in the world that you would want to bring attack traffic back to your data center to mitigate. If you look at our Department of Defense, how do they defend? They would much rather fight the war across the pond than in their backyard every day. And that's the same strategy that the government is considering and should consider as they continue to evolve the executive order. The other area that I wanted to address is the workforce. And there is a significant section in there that talks about the government's need to recruit, develop, and enhance the current cyber skills of the employees. Now, if you take a look at the number of, just within civilian agencies, there's probably 2.1, 2.2 million employees. Only 5% of those individuals are dedicated to IT. We're about 115,000 employees. The percentage of skilled IT workers that have cyber experience is much less than 5%. So basically, we have a skills gap. And we all know that in order to address that, we've got to retain our workforce, we have to train. We also need to recruit the new millennium or other people from industry, which is not the easiest thing in the world given pay scale and other considerations. But the key is that we've got to be able to recruit those individuals. And there's some great legislation out there in terms of considering loan forgiveness. Get the kids coming right out of the college that probably know as much about cybersecurity as we do in this room, depending on where they went to school, and be able to bring them on board and forgive their loans, if in fact they work for the government for 4, 5, 6 years. That's a technique, as well as other incentives that are going on right now from National Science Foundation with the CyberCorp, where they're actually providing 10 to 15 scholarships for 70 universities out there that focus on cybersecurity and engineering. In addition to that, the government will continue, or we hope they continue, to leverage managed security services or security as a service in the cloud. Why? 7x24, always on, an adaptable architecture, because the bad guys are changing their vectors all the time. So the fact of the matter is you need to be able to keep up, if not surpass, the speed at which you can respond to an attack. So those are key elements: federal network, resiliency, distributed attacks, as well as the federal workforce. So now let me just talk a little bit about some of the drivers that I believe will make this executive order as successful, if not more successful, than other executive orders. For those that have been in the industry as long as I have, the government has kicked off, whether through OMB initiatives, executive orders, or just plain technology initiatives within the government. Basically, those initiatives, some have succeeded, some have failed. The ones that have failed is not because of the government or people in this room. They failed because of competing priorities, limited resources, and just as important, if not more important than anything else, yet another unfunded mandate. So if you take a look at the executive order and why it will succeed, there are 3 key initiatives that are going on right now in the government. One is the Modernization Government Technology Act that infuses $228 million into the government to help agencies uplift their legacy-based technologies that were installed 10 years ago, 30 years ago, which never had cyber in mind. Certainly not the cyber attacks that we're seeing and the vectors we're seeing today. So $228 million to help agencies uplift their legacy databases or legacy technologies, and that will include security. Then if you take a look at the president's budget, if approved, a 35% increase in cyber technology. And then you've heard about it today, but the DHS CDM program, which is really there to fill the gaps and help boost up the protection and mitigation for our agencies from an endpoint to a network to perimeter defense in phase 3, that alone has been increased almost 3-fold in funding, from over $100 million to close to $300 million. So we got the first checkbox. Funding, mandated funding that's going to complement the executive order. The next thing is government accountability. So now, in this executive order, agency heads will be held accountable, and there will be a point of contact for security within every agencies that report to the agency head that must take into consideration the executive order and execute on risk assessment, mitigation, and protection. And then finally, this administration, through the American Technology Council, through MGT, and other initiatives, another initiative would be the collaboration between DHS and Commerce with regards to bot mitigation techniques, not only for the government, but for commercial industry. So that coming together, and with industry playing a key role in terms of providing input and guidance, along with American Technology Act and others, there is no reason in the world that we should not see this executive order succeed and achieve the results it needs because it has everything it needs behind it. Industry has agency focus and it has funding. So with that, I'm Tom Ruff. Thank you for listening to me, and have a great day.